Ardent EV enthusiasts will sometimes talk about the celebrated EV grin, the grin that people get when they experience the instant torque and usually quick acceleration of an EV for the very first time. It existed when the EV1 was rolling off the production line for the very first time. It existed when Tesla was debuting its original Roadster. And yeah, come to think of it, it existed when I test drove the prototype Nissan Leaf Mule at a very small test track in London 15 years ago. And if you visit a Drive Electric Day or attend a local EV owners meetup, there's usually someone there willing and able to let you pop your EV cherry, as it were, to experience the thrill of electric for the very first time. And once you've had some time behind the wheel of an EV, there's definitely a honeymoon period where you want more acceleration, more tyre screeching, and enough torque to snap your neck back. For some people, that's enough. For others, the benefits of driving electric, no noise, smooth acceleration, low maintenance costs, and being able to fill up wherever there's a power socket also add to that appeal. And then there's a group of buyers and owners for whom the latest and greatest tech is the biggest draw. The ability to drive what amounts to your most expensive computer ever, with free wheels included. And some EVs out there tick some of those boxes, but it isn't always the ones you might expect. For me, the lowly Renault Twizy is some of the best fun I've had on four wheels, even though it left the factory with a limited top speed and acceleration that's not exactly brisk. Different strokes for different folks. But there's also a group of people for whom EVs feel, well, sterile, boring, pedestrian. A group of people who miss being able to tinker and tune, people who miss the analogue feel of a manual gearbox, or who want to feel more connected to the road. And today, I'm going to look at the ways we, and the auto industry in general, can encourage those particular folks to go electric. Before we address any particular perceived problems with EVs from the perspective of traditional ICE vehicle enthusiasts, I want to squish a particular misconception that in order to like ICE vehicles, you must hate EVs, and in order to love EVs, you must hate ICE. I'm not sure where this misconception comes from, and I'm sure it does in part come from the truly terrible FUD that's been sent the way of the EV industry by the likes of Messrs. Clarkson, May and Hammond under the guise of entertainment. But outside of the very small, thankfully, subset of petrolheads who exist in a bubble of white, middle-aged, middle-class pillocks who may or may not have narcissistic and nationalistic tendencies and think people with brown or black skin might be up to no good, and outside of the realm of people whose political viewpoint is influenced by a desire to not appear woke, the majority of people I've met who are traditional ICE car fans are honestly curious about EVs. They want to experience them firsthand and give them a go. They want to be able to thrash them on a racetrack, and they come from a diverse group of people of all ages, genders and backgrounds who enjoy driving because driving, or cars, or engineering, or because it's not about the destination. It's about getting there. That other group I mentioned, I'm not going to convince them, and neither are you. I'm talking about the ones who avoid EVs because of their own toxicity, or they swallow whatever bovine byproduct is being spewed by their favourite political figure, or entertainer, until, well, the end of time. They're just going to keep driving diesel or gasoline until it's no longer available. And look, I'm sure they are excited about their hoped-for Mad Max future. But for everyone else, let's look at what needs to change before the mainstream ICE fan can make the switch. And I think we can break it down to four main challenges that exist that need to be met by the electric auto industry before hardened gearheads actually make that switch. In addition to all of the usual suspects, of course, concerning affordability, perceived lifespan, and the unfortunately normalised fears that first-time owners have about going electric. Luckily, though, for some of these, as I'll detail, we're starting to see those things being addressed. But in every case, I think more needs to happen before we see a mainstream ICE to EV exodus. My 4 main categories? A perceived lack of soul. Vehicles that are perceived as being sterile and uninspiring because of a lack of true analog controllability. Then we have a perceived lack of fixability. Vehicles that aren't easily repaired by the average auto enthusiast with a good set of tools and some spare time, often because you need skills outside of those traditionally held by your average ICE owner-driver. Then we have the perceived lack of a challenge in taming the metaphorical beast, either because of safety systems that, while designed to keep occupants safe on the road, end up acting to quote-unquote stop the fun, or remove any of the perceived skills that hardened gear jammers enjoy, like perfecting the perfect gear change or nailing the power delivery coming out of a corner. And finally, a perceived lack of options for customization and modifications due to lockdown software, custom or proprietary parts, and a complete dearth of aftermarket performance add-ons. Of course, there are others, but I'm keeping it to these 4 main categories in addition to the usual suspects I added earlier about cost and affordability. And you'll also note that I use the word perceived a lot in my descriptions, partly because while each of these categories or fears have a real, tangible aspect to them, it's also often the case that as you delve deeper, you can find solutions, as I will explain a little later on. I'm also, for the most part, going to ignore the subset of gearheads who are actually truck folk, people who drive a massive toy hauler for weekend fun and who generally aren't that interested in EV ownership. While there are some great electric pickup trucks out there, and yes, as I've proven many of times, they can tow things like cars super long distances with nary a problem, it does feel like the matter of dealing with hardened Julie fans is a completely different video. So instead, I'm going to focus on petrolheads who primarily focus on cars for track day fun, customization, and daily driving wee. So let us know if you'd like to make one for the truck folks too. Anyway, to the first one. A lack of soul. I'm sure plenty of people watching this would disagree with the sentiment. I myself do to some extent. And I've been lucky enough to drive all kinds of EVs out there with amazing driving characteristics thanks to my job. Cars that egg you into every corner and leave you breathlessly smiling at the end of an engaging drive. But these experiences are usually reserved for more expensive models from brands known for their performance chops. Porsche sits at the top of the list, closely followed by BMW and to some extent Mercedes-Benz's tuning house AMG. If you've got scads of cash sitting in the bank, you can totally find an immaculately well-engineered driver's machine waiting to be spanked on the open road and pushed into every single corner that also happens to be electric. I also think my opinions on the Ford Mustang Mach-E's spicier variants, specifically the Mach-E GT Performance and Mach-E Rally, are well known by this point, and I'd suggest they too fit the capabilities of cars that you can actually find a soul in. Let's also not forget the Hyundai Ioniq 5N, a car that I've not yet driven but have heard nothing but good things about, and the Kia EV6 GT, a vehicle that anyone who has moaned about the lack of soul in an EV should drive at least once. But of all the cars I've listed thus far, there's not really a vehicle that sits at the lower end of the price point that also happens to be a quote-unquote driver's car. There's no Volkswagen Golf equivalent just yet. There's no Ford Focus or Fiesta ST EV equivalents. And while cars like the Mini Cooper SE are small and fun and chuckable, even they have price points that put your average buyer off. And price per grin is not something many ICE fans get good reads on from an EV, even though, as I've noted, many who do get behind the wheel learn pretty quickly that the quick and instant acceleration of most EVs out there is just as addictive in many ways as smashing through the gears, if you can get them behind the wheel in the first place, that is. Sadly, however, for every EV out there with push-me-daddy manners in the corners, there are those who do EVs a this service. When EVs were fresh and new and exciting, frankly, most automakers let you lay the go pedal and leave a stream of rubber behind. It's one of the reasons why the original Chevrolet Bolt EV is such a blast. GM unwittingly built it and let it be a little hot hatch trapped inside the body of not quite a crossover, but more and more we're seeing lower-end, entry-level models where the accelerator is pretty heavily moderated, designed to be a better mimic for the laggy behaviour of a moderately underpowered gasoline vehicle. And that's doing nothing to help with the EVs are boring myth. Before I leave the first point, let's talk briefly about the ICE car fans who moan about the lack of gears in an EV. And I get it. I mean, I learned how to drive a manual gearbox, as most Brits do, and I've owned enough higher-end vehicles with stick shifts to know how to rev match as you go down through the gears and how to shift up properly going through them. It's my guilty pleasure when a friend with a stick shift visits to take it out for a spin. The car, not my friend. And one of my friends, hi Mobius, even let me take their brand new stick shift Fiesta ST out a few years ago. When it was brand new, I drove it to its absolute limit and he quietly suggested after about 10 minutes I'd had enough seat time after I'd had some fun. Spoil sport. Many people will complain that EVs don't give you the same level of fun as a stick shift, but I've also actually found that learning the power curve of your accelerator pedal is just as fun in an EV. You do need to usually put an EV into sport mode, but then it does usually, if it's well made, give you a different challenge that I equate to driving stick, using regen to capture energy as you enter into a corner before smoothly laying it back on the way out. Sure, there are unfortunately some EVs coming to market right now with boost functions that mimic dropping a gear or even fake gearboxes and engine noises, but give me a suitably sized motor for the vehicle, and if you're wondering, I'm talking in excess of 250 kilowatts for a medium-sized sedan, and I'm there. And no, if you think a Tesla Model 3 is the epitome of driver feedback and road handling, you're not really a car person, are you? Next on our list, fixability. And it's a big one. Anyone who's spent even a small amount of time in the ICE vehicle gearhead world knows that understanding how vehicles work and knowing how to fix them at the side of the road is an essential skill set. If you're driving your prized car and the engine's not running smoothly, knowing you can head home and fettle? Well, that's part of the fun and the experience for many gearheads. Sure, it is less common if you're someone who enjoys the comforts of more modern rides, but I get the challenges associated with lifting the hood and tinkering. And look, I've done my fair share of tappet tweaking. I've changed a head gasket. I've replaced a clutch and I've ringed my pistons. And I also just realised how incredibly NSFW that might sound for people who aren't car folk, but I promise it's all good. Not so clean, but good fun. Although I honestly do not miss messing with cars and getting oil everywhere. The smell, the oil under your nails, the metal shavings in your hair, I'll stop. EVs, though, they're not eminently fixable at home because automakers aren't keen on letting DIY folks fix them. And to some extent, that's with good reason. We have collectively allowed people to work on little exploding machines for more than 100 years, but battery electric ones? Oh no, they're dangerous. Or something. Even though in most countries we somehow let people work on mains voltage electricity. That's different. You understand. Luckily, repairability is becoming more and more achievable. Older EVs, specifically ones that haven't been in production for a while, are finally getting DIY support and love from aftermarket and right to repair advocates. The Nissan Leaf is at the top of that list, although it's not really ever been a driver's car, so folks who are doing right to repair stuff on it aren't often the same folks who are true gear jamming car fans. Although we should be careful and never say never. I mean, I know some auto industry and airline industry engineers who build and design things that make the industry go around or send people into space, and they actually drive Nissan Leafs as their daily drivers because they are cheap and they are eminently fixable. I don't have an easy solution to this en masse though, but automakers do need to work more with aftermarket suppliers, parts companies and tuning houses to make EVs that are more readily fixable by someone in their garage. And if we have computer systems that can plug into your car to tweak ignition timing and give you a few more brake horsepower, why isn't the industry designing EVs to be tweakable in the same way? I know. Batteries. But seriously, what if there was a disclaimer window that you could click that went, I know that I am pushing this vehicle beyond the arbitrary limit that someone in Detroit or Hanover decided was prudent for a long life. I know plenty of people would go ahead and click that dialogue and choose more power. The next one is unfortunately harder to deal with, the lack of perceived challenge with driving many modern EVs. It doesn't matter if it's the Fiat 500e locking out the accelerator pedal if you press the brake, something which I think is incredibly unsafe and I'm very unhappy about, or a vehicle's traction control system never truly allowing you to turn it off. It is all ultimately a problematic barrier to fun times on four wheels. But those safety systems are designed to make things safe for you and everyone else on the road, and most of the time they don't get in the way of driving unless you drive like a complete hoon or you overlay on some underdeveloped, frankly dangerous semi-autonomous driver assistance systems that have nasty habits of drifting over at or suddenly braking at every opportunity, which sadly way too many semi-autonomous driver assistance systems on the market today do. Luckily, though, there's a solution. Track mode, sport mode, and better education as to when and how those things can be turned off or on. Some automakers are very clear about their traction control operation, others not so much. But that pains me because EVs are perfect for many track day pursuits where turning off all artificial assistance would bring back the challenging thrill of driving. On a race course. I need to be clear. And this is where we have a problem. See, I don't want people driving on the public highway like hoonigans. I want there to be guardrails, especially with EVs increasing in size and power. And I'm sure you do too. But given the amount of technology in modern-day EVs, it shouldn't be difficult to allow an owner to turn off traction control and increase the perceived fun and challenge for a track day event or an autocross course. And while some EVs already do very well at both of these events, the Chevrolet Bolt EV is a favourite on everything from ice racing tracks to autocross and more, and both Hyundai and Kia are now embracing drift and track modes in their vehicles, I suspect more people would get into EVs if they felt they could test their skills a little more effectively. I'd also welcome more track day events specifically for EVs. Luckily, there are some great ones here in the US, and as I understand it, Japan has its own race series for non-professional EV racing. But for things to really take off, we're going to need to see more partnership between automakers and third-party race tuning and aftermarket specialists. And that brings me to the final item on my list. Right now, unplugged performance for Teslas and occasional specialist houses for other brands are a start. But we also need more. We need more groups online where owners swap details about custom suspension and performance chipping. And yes, we also need more performance chipping options too. We need customers to be allowed to opt to add an additional 20 or 30 kilowatts to their EV or tweak the way their accelerator responds. After all, they're modern cars. It's just digital mapping. If you're watching this, I'd not be surprised if you assumed there weren't any groups dedicated to tweaking of existing EVs, but most owners' forums do have sections dedicated to making little nips and tucks here and there to a vehicle's suspension and handling to more in-depth changes. And while some community groups are a little drama-filled, naming no names on Facebook, there are some really amazing ones with a welcoming atmosphere for anyone who wants to get involved in tweaking, as well as doing more traditionally gear-jamming things on track and off it with their EV. And the more of this we see and the more we can allow EVs to be more than just tools or tech showcases, I think we're going to get more and more traditional petrolheads on board. After all, if it goes like stink, can be tweaked and can be worked on, and spanks every internal combustion engine they can come up with, I think more folks will discover that EVs aren't quite as boring as they first thought. But that's me. What about you? Thanks for joining me today, and if you've got thoughts, make sure you leave them in our Discord chat room, our Patreon page, our YouTube comment section, or you can reach out to us on Mastodon. Thanks to the amazing list of people scrolling by on your screen right now. They are some of the more than 1,500 people who help make this channel possible through Patreon and YouTube, covering our bills, paying our team, and making sure that we can remain 100% independent. If you'd like to join them and see your name listed here, just follow the links below. There are a range of different tiers you can sign up for, from as little as $1 a month, or if you pay yearly, around $10.08 a year. A massive welcome to our newest supporters: Bree Crockford, CAP, Christian Balal, Everything on a Bi-Bagel, Pidge Eon, and Brett Chandler. To join the list and get your shout-out, become a paid Patreon member for your moment of fame. If you'd like to support us with a one-off donation, you'll find links below for Ko-fi and Bitcoin donations, and we even have a good old-fashioned PO box you can reach us at, the address for which you'll also find below. And if you're in need of some swag, do check out our swag store in the down below. We've got some fantastic content coming right up, so make sure you're subscribed on PeerTube or YouTube, and we'll see you soon. As a reminder, we make new videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. If you want more, the almighty algorithm thinks you might enjoy this video, but what does it know? We think this one is also well worth a look. See you soon, and as always, keep evolving.